The eviction notice felt unnaturally heavy in my hand, like a slab of cold granite. Each typed word seemed to pulse with a quiet, final kind of dread, panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat, tightening around my chest until breathing felt like a luxury I hadn't earned. Weeks. It had been weeks since the rent was due. A chasm of time I desperately tried and failed to bridge. My bank account was a barren landscape, mocking me with its near-zero balance. The meager earnings from my freelance graphic design work, once a hopeful stream, had dwindled to a trickle, barely enough to cover the essentials. Cheap pasta, wilting vegetables, the harsh glare of the power bill, forget the rent, the obscene figure demanded for this small, increasingly suffocating apartment I clung to with white knuckles. I'd sold everything that wasn't nailed down my grandmother's locket, the decent laptop I needed for work, replaced by a sputtering relic. Even the books I loved, now lining shelves in second-hand stores, friends had been tapped, their polite refusals or strained generosity only adding layers to my shame. Credit cards, maxed out, monuments to my foolish optimism. Every door I'd pushed had slammed shut in my face. I was standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath my worn-out shoes. And then there was him, Julian Vance, my landlord, not some shuffling, eccentric old man you might picture from a sitcom. No. Vance was something else entirely, late 40s, maybe early 50s. Though time seemed reluctant to etch itself onto his sharp features, he wore wealth like a second skin, bespoke suits that probably cost more than my annual income, shoes polished to a mirror shine, a watch on his wrist that whispered, rather than shouted, its exorbitant price. He moved with a predator's grace, an unnerving stillness that somehow filled every room he entered. There was an aura about him, an implicit understanding that the world rearranged itself to accommodate his desires. He wasn't just successful, he radiated a kind of ruthless confidence, the quiet assurance of a man who always got what he wanted. Until now, his interactions with me had been brief, professionally distant, conducted through curt emails or the occasional impersonal phone call about a leaky faucet. Polite. Yes, but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite decipher. Something cold, appraising. So when his sharp, decisive knock echoed through my flimsy apartment door that evening, a different kind of cold seeped into my bones. This wasn't about a leaky faucet. This was the final act. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage. I smoothed down my worn jeans, took a shaky breath, and opened the door just a crack. He stood there, leaning casually against the frame, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. He looked impossibly elegant, even in the gloom, a stark contrast to the peeling paint and desperation clinging to my side of the threshold. "We need to talk, Clara," he said. He didn't use my name often. His voice was smoother than silk, dangerously calm. But beneath it, I heard the steely edge of an ultimatum. The air crackled with unspoken finality. I know why you're here, Mr. Vance," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "I just need a little more time. I'm working on it. I promise." Something came through. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. "Time," he interrupted softly, his gaze sweeping over me, slow and deliberate, lingering in a way that made my skin crawl. It wasn't lecherous. Not exactly. It was possessive, assessing. "Time is a luxury you no longer possess, I'm afraid." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then, a subtle shift in his expression, a flicker in those cool grey eyes. Unless, perhaps, we could explore an alternative arrangement. My breath hitched. Alternative arrangement. What could that possibly mean? A payment plan. Community service scrubbing his office floors. My mind scrambled, grasping at improbable straws. I don't understand. Mr. Vance, what do you mean? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pushed the door open wider, stepping inside without invitation, bringing the scent of expensive cologne and sheer power into my cramped living space. He moved deliberately, shutting the door behind him with a soft, definitive click that echoed like a gunshot in the sudden stillness. The room felt instantly smaller, charged with his presence. He turned, his eyes locking onto mine. "Oh, I think you do, Clara," he murmured, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man holding all the cards, enjoying the moment before he laid them down. Heat surged into my cheeks, a burning tide of humiliation and disbelief. No, he couldn't possibly be suggesting that it was insane, degrading. I wasn't that kind of girl. I had principles, self-respect, didn't I? But the image of my meager belongings piled on the sidewalk, the chilling prospect of sleeping in my beat-up car, flashed behind my eyes. Desperation, I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach, was a powerful, corrosive. It ate away at principles, blurred lines you swore you'd never cross. I opened my mouth, intending to protest, to feign outrage, perhaps even to find some hidden reserve of strength and tell him to get out. But he cut me off, his voice dropping lower, becoming almost conspiratorial. "Just think about it," he urged, his gaze intense. "One night, no strings attached, a simple transaction, your considerable debt, poof, gone, vanished, as if it never existed." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. I could smell the starch on his shirt, the faint metallic tang of his watch. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and produced a slim, elegant business card holder. He extracted a card, heavy stock, minimalist design, just his name and a private number, and placed it gently on my cluttered kitchen counter, next to a stack of unpaid bills. It sat there like a venomous insect. "Or," he continued, his tone hardening slightly, "you can start packing. You'll be out by the end of the week. Your choice, Clara." And just like that, he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him with the same chilling finality as before. He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't need to. He'd planted the seed. Now he would wait for it to sprout in the barren soil of my desperation. I stood frozen, staring at the card. It felt like it was burning a hole in my counter, radiating a toxic heat. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, each beat echoing the impossible choice he had laid before me. The days that followed blurred into a suffocating haze of anxiety and frantic, fruitless effort. I plastered on a smile and scoured online job boards until my eyes burned, sending out resumes into the digital void. Each rejection email a tiny stab wound. I called old contacts, forcing cheerful updates while subtly probing for leads, feeling the familiar sting of pity or polite dismissal. The shame was a constant, heavy cloak. I even drafted, then deleted, then drafted again. A message to Michael, my ex. The thought of asking him for help felt like swallowing shards of glass. Our ending hadn't been just a breakup. It had been a detonation, leaving behind wreckage and the bitter taste of betrayal. He'd sworn love and fidelity while weaving a tapestry of lies, his other life discovered accidentally, shattering the fragile reality I'd built around us. No, I couldn't crawl back to him, not even now. My pride, battered as it was, wouldn't allow it. One night, scrolling numbly through social media, a darkly humorous suggestion from a well-meaning but naive friend popped up. Maybe try a sugar daddy site, LOL. I'd laughed it off then, a hollow sound in my empty apartment. But later, much later, in the desperate quiet of 3 a.m., I found myself typing the words into a search engine, my face flushed with a mixture of morbid curiosity and profound self-loathing. Profile after profile swam before my eyes, older men, flashing cash, promising allowances. How different was this, really, from what Julian Vance had proposed? The thought was repugnant, a violation of everything I thought I stood for. And yet, the alternative, the stark terror of genuine homelessness, loomed larger, colder, more terrifying with each passing hour. I tried to picture it, truly picture it, stuffing my few remaining possessions into black trash bags, the metallic taste of fear as I turned the key in my car ignition, knowing that was now my only shelter, searching for safe places to park, trying to sleep upright in the driver's seat, the constant gnawing hunger, the desperate search for a public restroom, the sheer, soul-crushing effort of just surviving day to day. Did I have that kind of strength, that resilience, or would I simply break? The honest answer terrified me. Just as that bleak internal debate reached its peak, another knock rattled the door, sharper this time, more insistent. My heart leaped into my throat. A sickening jolt of adrenaline. Vance. He'd come back for his answer, but when I peered through the peephole, my blood ran cold. It was Julian Vance. But he wasn't alone. Flanking him were two other men. They were tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark, expensive suits that mirrored Vance's own impeccable style. They didn't look like friends dropping by for coffee. They looked like enforcement, bodyguards, maybe worse. Their faces were impassive, granite hard, their eyes scanning the hallway with unnerving alertness. An aura of quiet, controlled menace radiated from them, thick and suffocating. Vance saw me hesitate through the peephole, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Clara," he called, his voice still smooth but now laced with something harder, less patient. "I can see you've been giving my proposal some thought." He gestured vaguely towards his companions. "I brought some associates. We thought we could simplify things for you." Simplify. The word hung in the air like a threat. "Let's make this easy. A single evening. You clear your debt. Walk away with a generous bonus, enough to give you a fresh start. Perhaps." His eyes gleamed. "All you have to do is say yes. Right here. Right now." My hand trembled on the doorknob. Every instinct screamed at me to slam it shut. Bolt it. Call the police. Though what would I tell them that my landlord was offering me a disgusting deal that his silent companions terrified me? It wasn't illegal. Not technically. Just monstrous. But I didn't slam the door. I hesitated. That split second of indecision felt like a lifetime. My mouth was sandpaper dry. Vance's initial offer had been repulsive enough. A violation whispered in the privacy of my own apartment. But this felt different. The presence of these two silent, imposing figures shifted the dynamic entirely. It wasn't just a proposition anymore. It felt like pressure, unspoken coercion. The weight of their collective gaze pinned me in place. They weren't physically forcing me, not yet, but the silent expectation, the sheer intimidation factor, hung thick and heavy in the stale hallway air. It pressed down on me, suffocating. I don't know, I managed to whisper. The sound barely audible, even to my own ears. My voice was thin, fragile, pathetic. Vance's smile widened, victory already lighting his eyes. He knew he had me cornered. "Take your time," he said, his tone magnanimous now, but the underlying threat remained. "But understand, Clara, this offer, it's evaporating as we speak. Opportunity doesn't linger for those who hesitate." He gave a slight nod to his men, and they turned in unison, moving with unnerving synchronicity back down the hall. Vance lingered for a moment, his eyes holding mine, a final, chilling promise in their depths, before he too turned and disappeared into the shadows. The silence they left behind was deafening. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my body trembling uncontrollably. My mind was a battlefield. Revulsion warred with stark, pragmatic fear. I should have felt nothing but disgust, righteous anger, but a treacherous, insidious sliver of my consciousness, the part stripped bare by desperation, started to whisper poisonous rationalizations. "How is this really so different?" it hissed. "What about Michael? He took everything, my trust, my affection, my body, and treated it like garbage. He lied. He cheated. He pretended love while sleeping with someone else. At least this has a brutal honesty to it. A transaction, eyes wide open." That night was endless. Sleep was an impossibility. Chased away by the relentless carousel of my thoughts, I paced the small confines of my apartment like a caged animal, replaying Vance's words, the cold menace of his companions, the stark reality of the eviction notice, over and over. I listed the reasons Abdijabis had not to do it. My dignity, what little remained, my self-worth, already eroded by failure and poverty, the fundamental sense of right and wrong that felt like a distant memory. My body, my choice. Wasn't that what we fought for? But then, inevitably, the counter-arguments surged, fueled by raw fear, the image of myself huddled in my car on a freezing night, the shame of begging for spare change, the slow, grinding erosion of hope that homelessness represented, losing not just my home, but my footing in the world, my identity. Which violation was worse? Selling a piece of myself to survive, or losing everything, including the self I was trying to protect? The equation felt impossible, sickening. By the time the first grey, watery light of dawn seeped through my blinds, a decision had solidified, heavy and cold as lead in my gut. It wasn't a choice made with conviction, but rather an acceptance of the least unbearable path. My hand shook as I picked up my phone, my fingers fumbling as I found the number on Julian Vance's business card. It felt alien, illicit. I pressed dial, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert, unsurprised, as if he'd been sitting by the phone, waiting. "Clara," he said simply. There was no need for preamble. "You've made a wise decision," he stated, a note of cool satisfaction in his tone. Wise? No. Desperate. Necessary? Perhaps. In the twisted logic of survival, I tried to convince myself it was just a transaction, a temporary detour. I could compartmentalize. I could endure it. It didn't have to mean anything. But stepping across the threshold of that opulent, anonymous hotel suite hours later, the carefully constructed walls of my rationalization began to crumble. The air conditioning hummed softly, carrying the faint scent of lilies and expensive cleaning products. Thick carpet muffled my footsteps. Everything was polished, gleaming, impersonal. Julian Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city skyline, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. His two associates were there too, standing silently, sentinel-like, near the door. Their presence amplified the strangeness, the inherent wrongness of the situation. Their gazes, when they flickered towards me, were unsettlingly blank, yet heavy with unspoken judgment, or perhaps just chilling indifference. I tried to focus on the promised outcome. The envelope of cash, the sweet relief of solvency, the ability to breathe again without the crushing weight of debt, survival. That was the mantra. Just survive this. Vance turned from the window, his eyes sweeping over me again. That same coolly appraising look, but now mixed with something else. Possession. Triumph. I couldn't decipher the complex emotions swirling in their depths. He walked towards me, extending a crystal glass filled with pale gold wine. To new arrangements, he murmured, his voice a low purr. As I reached for the glass, his fingers deliberately brushed against mine. It wasn't accidental. The contact sent an unexpected, unwelcome jolt through me, not desire, but a confusing mix of revulsion and a strange, electric awareness of him, of the power dynamic so starkly on display. Relax, Clara, he said softly, noticing my tremor. It'll be easier if you don't overthink it. Easier for him. Maybe. The hours that followed are a fractured blur in my memory, a series of degrading moments I tried desperately to lock away. The morning light, sharp and unforgiving, sliced through a gap in the heavy hotel curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the sterile air. It did nothing to dispel the thick, cloying feeling coating my insides. The pit of self-disgust lodged deep in my stomach. I lay utterly still on the king-sized bed, staring numbly at the textured ceiling, my body feeling alien, used. My mind felt muffled, wrapped in cotton wool, refusing to process the full weight of what had transpired. The vast room was eerily silent now, empty. Vance and his silent partners had departed hours ago, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his cologne and a profound sense of violation. On the polished mahogany nightstand beside the bed sat a thick, plain white envelope. It bulged obscenely. Cash. My payment. With a hand that trembled violently, betraying the forced numbness of my mind, I reached for it. The crispness of the bills felt slick, dirty beneath my fingertips. I didn't count it immediately, but I could tell. It was more than enough. Enough to cover the back rent, the late fees, enough to keep the wolves from the door for a month or two, maybe even enough for a deposit on somewhere new, somewhere far away from Julian Vance. For a single, fleeting second, the knot of anxiety in my chest loosened. I could breathe, but the relief was instantly swamped by a tidal wave of nausea. The money felt heavy, tainted, like blood money. The deed was done. There was no undoing it. This was the price. Back in my own apartment, the familiar surroundings felt alien, tainted by association. I stood under the scalding spray of the shower for what felt like hours, scrubbing my skin raw with cheap soap, desperately trying to wash away the feeling of his touch, the scent of the hotel room, the phantom weight of those other men's eyes. But the feeling clung to me, insidious, burrowing deeper than skin. It was a stain on my soul. I had told myself I would feel powerful, in control. I had made a choice, taken action, secured my survival. Instead, a profound, crushing emptiness hollowed me out. I felt brittle, disposable, like something broken. The sudden vibration of my phone on the bathroom counter shattered the silence, making me jump. A text message from Julian Vance. "Trust you enjoyed yourself as much as I did. We should do this again soon." The casual arrogance, the possessive assumption, sent a fresh wave of revulsion through me. I dropped the phone as if it had burned my hand, watching it clatter against the cheap linoleum floor. Was that it? Was that all I was to him now? A repeatable experience, a service rendered, a commodity. The thought made my stomach churn violently. And then, as if the universe delighted in cruel irony, another notification pinged. A different name, a ghost from my past. "Hey, been thinking about you." It was Michael, my betraying ex. A hysterical, choked laugh escaped my lips. Of all the times for him to crawl out of the woodwork, now guilt, sharp and unexpected, pierced through the numbness. He had shattered my trust. Yes, but had I really done any better? Had I somehow become the thing I despised? At least his deception had been masked by false affection. I had walked into this transaction with my eyes wide open. Hadn't I? Or had I just chosen a different kind of blindness? I ignored Michael's message, letting it hang unanswered in the digital ether. But the past, it seemed, refused to stay buried. In the days that followed, the reprieve I'd bought felt increasingly fragile. Poisoned by the knowledge of its cost, Julian Vance contacted me again. As promised, and again, his texts became more frequent. Casual demands masked as invitations. It wasn't just him anymore, either. One of his associates, the taller one, with eyes like chips of ice, sent a message too. More money was offered, more nights. Deeper secrecy was implied. A shared transgression that bound us in an unwelcome intimacy. Each ping of my phone felt like a tiny erosion of my resolve. I told myself no, firmly, fiercely. Once was enough. It was survival. It's over. I typed out polite refusals, citing fictitious commitments, trying to create distance. But Vance was persistent, relentless. Then, during one curt phone call where I tried, yet again, to put him off, he dropped the bombshell, his voice hardening with irritation. "Look, Clara, just be discreet. All right, my wife. She's been asking questions lately. Be smart about this." Wife. The word hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Wife. He was married. It hadn't even occurred to me. In my self-absorbed panic and desperation, I hadn't considered the collateral damage, the ripples spreading outwards from my single, desperate act. I had pictured him as a solitary predator, existing only in the context of my problem, but he had a whole other life. A wife who was now, apparently, suspicious. The ground beneath my feet suddenly felt unstable, treacherous. I wasn't just involved in a degrading transaction. I was tangled in the messy, dangerous threads of infidelity, a pawn in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. The web felt infinitely more complex, more suffocating than I had ever imagined, and I had no idea how, or if, I could ever get untangled. The weight of Vance's casual warning, "My wife, she's been asking questions," pressed down on me, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my days. His wife, a faceless entity, suddenly given form, substance, and the potential for immense disruption. I tried to rationalize it away. It's not my problem. It's his mess. I was just surviving, but the excuses felt thin, pathetic. Deep down, a cold dread settled in. Women like her, wives of powerful, wealthy, deceitful men, they rarely stayed ignorant for long. They developed instincts, a sixth sense for betrayal honed by years of potential deception. Suspicion, once planted, tended to grow roots. The days crawled by in a fog of unease. My phone continued its relentless assault. Texts from Vance, becoming more insistent, less patient. Another feeler from the icy-eyed associate. Each notification chipped away at the fragile justification I'd built. I did what I had to do to survive. But was it still survival if I kept going back for more? Could I claim victimhood if I willingly stepped back into the fire? The moral lines blurred, shifted, threatened to disappear altogether. Then, one rainy afternoon, another knock, not Vance's sharp rap, softer, hesitant, yet somehow more unnerving. My breath caught. Who could it be? Not Michael. Surely. Hesitantly, heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, I went to the door. Peering through the peephole, a woman stood on my doorstep, elegant, impeccably dressed in expensive-looking clothes that whispered understated wealth. A tailored cashmere coat, simple gold jewelry, mid-50s perhaps, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of cool composure that seemed almost brittle, like ice threatening to crack. And in that instant, even though I'd never seen her before, I knew. This was her. This was Eleanor Vance. She didn't wait for an invitation. As I fumbled with the lock, she pushed the door open and stepped inside, her eyes sweeping the cramped, dingy apartment with an expression that was neither pity nor disgust, but something cooler, more analytical. There was an intensity simmering just beneath her polished surface, a contained fury in the set of her jaw. "You're not the first, you know," she said, her voice low and surprisingly steady, cutting through the tense silence. "And judging by my husband's appetites, you certainly won't be the last." My own voice seemed to have deserted me. I could only stare, mute, as she walked further into the room, her expensive heels silent on my worn rug. She stopped at the cluttered kitchen counter, the same counter where Julian had left his business card, where his offer had poisoned the air. From her elegant leather handbag, she pulled out a thick envelope, identical in shape and size to the one Julian had left in the hotel room, but somehow feeling heavier, denser with implication. She let it drop onto the counter with a soft thud. It landed right next to a wilting potted plant, a stark symbol of my own failing life. "Take it," she commanded, her voice flat, devoid of overt emotion, yet vibrating with an underlying power. "Take it and disappear. Erase yourself from his orbit. Or—" She paused, her eyes locking onto mine, sharp and penetrating. "Don't. Stay. Watch what happens when I finally decide to burn his whole pathetic little empire to the ground." My first instinct, the one drilled into me by weeks of fear and desperation, was to snatch the envelope, grab the money, thank her profusely, turn tail, and run as far and as fast as I could, never look back, dissolve into anonymity. It was the escape I craved, offered on a silver platter, or rather, in a thick white envelope. But something held me back. It wasn't pride. Not anymore. It was something in her eyes, in the chilling confidence radiating from her. A shared understanding, perhaps, or just morbid curiosity. Why? The question slipped out before I could stop it, my voice raspy. Why pay me off if you're going to ruin him anyway? What's the point? A smile touched Eleanor Vance's lips, thin and cold, utterly devoid of warmth or humor. It didn't reach her eyes, which remained like chips of glacial ice. Because I enjoy options, dear, she replied, her voice dangerously soft. And because there's a certain satisfaction in watching men like Julian squirm. He thinks he holds all the power, pulls all the strings. He has no idea. In that moment, the dynamics of the situation shifted seismically. It snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. This wasn't really about me. Not fundamentally. I was just a pawn. Collateral damage in a much larger, longer war. This was about her, about power, vengeance, control, about reducing Julian Vance, the man who had clearly inflicted countless wounds upon her, to the same level of insignificance he had tried to impose on me, on others. It was about retribution, served cold and calculated, and for the first time since that first knock on my door, since the nightmare began, I felt something other than fear or self-loathing, a flicker of something hard, sharp, almost righteous, anger, not just for myself, but for her, for the faceless others she mentioned. Do it, I heard myself say, the words resolute, surprising even myself. I pushed the thick envelope back across the counter towards her, my hand steady now. Let him face the consequences. Expose him. Eleanor Vance's smile widened then, blossoming into something genuine. Albeit still sharp-edged, there was a fierce satisfaction in her eyes, a glint of triumphant fire. Oh, my dear. She chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. Don't you worry, I already have. She picked up the envelope, tucking it back into her expensive bag as if it were merely pocket change. Consider this a severance payment, nonetheless, for your inconvenience. She gave me one last, appraising look, a flicker of something unreadable, pity, respect, solidarity, before turning and walking out, leaving behind the lingering scent of her perfume and the electric charge of impending doom. The storm broke exactly 1 week later. It wasn't a quiet drizzle. It was a full-blown hurricane. News outlets exploded with the scandal. Allegations surfaced. Financial misconduct within his vast company. Misuse of funds. And then, inevitably, the stories from other women. More alternative arrangements. More exploitation. A pattern of predatory behavior meticulously exposed. Piece by devastating piece, Julian Vance's carefully constructed empire, built on wealth and intimidation, crumbled with shocking speed. His name became toxic, his reputation shredded beyond repair, partners bailed, stocks plummeted, lawsuits piled up like snowdrifts, the idyllic facade shattered, revealing the rot beneath. I watched it unfold from a distance, having already packed my few belongings and slipped away quietly before the worst of the media frenzy hit. I found a small, cheap room in a different part of the city, paid for with Eleanor Vance's severance. I should have felt liberated, vindicated, justice served, perhaps, a sense of victory, even, but the feeling was strangely hollow. Watching his downfall didn't erase what I had done. The choice I had made in that desperate moment. It didn't wash away the shame or the lingering self-disgust, settling into the anonymity of my new life. trying to piece myself back together. My phone buzzed one evening with an unfamiliar notification, a message request on a secure messaging app I barely used. The username meant nothing to me, a random jumble of letters and numbers, but the message itself, the phrasing, the tone, struck a chillingly familiar chord. Heard you might be looking for a new arrangement. Discreet, generous, interested. My finger hovered over the screen, hovering over the delete button. My blood ran cold. I knew this path. I knew exactly where it led. I had learned the hard way, paid the price. My stomach twisted. I should delete it, block the user, forget I ever saw it. And yet, a tiny, treacherous part of me, the part that remembered the crushing weight of poverty, the sheer terror of imminent homelessness, hesitated. The screen glowed, waiting for my choice. Delete or reply. The cycle threatened to begin anew.